Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we are stepping into a world that seems picture-perfect at first glance: pastel-colored kitchens, gleaming appliances, manicured lawns, and a sense that everything is exactly where it is supposed to be. But beneath the shiny veneer of 1960s suburbia, there was a quiet, relentless pressure that shaped the lives of an entire generation of women. These were the housewives of the era, expected to maintain not just a home, but an image of perfection that could withstand the scrutiny of neighbors, family, and society itself. Today, we are going to explore what it was like to live under that pressure, how the pursuit of domestic excellence defined daily life, and how women navigated an existence that demanded flawless households, poised appearances, and constant emotional labor, often all at the same time. The 1960s in America were a decade of contrasts. On one hand, there were technological innovations, shiny new appliances, and the promise of modern convenience. On the other, there was the invisible weight of expectation pressing on women in suburban homes. Housewives were celebrated in magazines and television shows as the ultimate arbiters of domestic bliss, yet this portrayal often glossed over the sheer scale of their responsibilities. Every day, they were tasked with maintaining spotless homes, preparing elaborate meals, managing children's schedules, and presenting themselves in a way that radiated calm, charm, and composure. Imagine waking up in a house where every detail down to the arrangement of the fruit on the counter, the shine of the silverware, and the neatness of the vacuumed carpet was expected to reflect both personal discipline and moral virtue. The pressure was subtle but pervasive. Social norms dictated that a woman's value was measured not only by her ability to manage her household but also by her skill at making it appear effortless. If the front lawn had one patch of untrimmed grass, if the curtains were not perfectly aligned, or if a single sock was missing from the laundry, it was not just a minor inconvenience, it was a potential mark of failure in a society obsessed with appearances. These expectations extended beyond the home and into the social sphere. Housewives were judged at bridge clubs, coffee mornings, PTA meetings, and neighborhood gatherings. Every interaction carried the unspoken rules of conformity: your outfit, your hairstyle, your ability to engage in polite conversation, and even the quality of the food you served could all become subjects of scrutiny. This constant evaluation created an environment where perfection was not optional, it was compulsory. And the consequences, while rarely overtly stated, were clear: social disapproval, gossip, and a persistent sense that you were never quite enough. But the housewife's day did not start at a convenient hour. It began long before the sun rose, often to the sound of an alarm clock signaling the start of a routine that left little room for rest. There were breakfasts to prepare, lunches to pack, children to wake and dress, and a household to tidy before the outside world even began its day. The weight of responsibility was immense, and yet it was largely invisible to those outside the domestic sphere. Friends, neighbors, and even family members often assumed that home life was leisurely or inherently manageable, not realizing the meticulous planning, physical effort, and emotional energy required to keep everything running smoothly. Technology, while marketed as a solution, often added layers of complexity rather than relief. Modern appliances promised efficiency and convenience, but many required careful attention, frequent maintenance, and a learning curve that left little time for anything else. The shiny new electric can openers, vacuum cleaners, blenders, and washing machines were marvels of innovation, yet they demanded constant oversight. A malfunctioning toaster could launch breakfast across the kitchen. A top-loading washing machine could spill water across the floor if not monitored carefully, and a blender could shake so violently it threatened to escape the countertop. Every gadget was a double-edged sword, a promise of progress paired with a risk of minor domestic catastrophe. Amid this whirlwind, appearance was another battlefield. Housewives were expected to emerge from these domestic challenges looking polished, poised, and composed. Hair had to be set, makeup applied, and clothing carefully chosen to convey an aura of effortless elegance. Practical comfort was secondary. Social acceptability was paramount. Women were effectively juggling the roles of laborer, manager, stylist, and diplomat all before many husbands had even left for work. The weight of these expectations was amplified by subtle societal cues: magazine covers featuring perfect homes and women, television shows portraying the ideal family life, and neighbors who seemed to effortlessly meet the same impossible standards. And then there were the emotional demands. The relentless pace of housework, combined with societal scrutiny, created a quiet strain on mental health. Housewives often felt invisible, underappreciated, and trapped by responsibilities that never ended. Every day was a cycle of chores, appearances, and emotional labor, repeated endlessly. The pressure to maintain a perfect household was a psychological weight as much as a physical one. Many women turned to small coping mechanisms: brief moments of rest with a cup of coffee, social visits with friends who understood the shared struggle, or simple acts of indulgence, like a magazine read or a favorite snack. Yet these moments were fleeting, often interrupted by the next urgent task or the latest crisis in the household. One of the more striking aspects of the era was the way this pressure intersected with medical culture. Mother's little helper, a term popularized in the 1960s, reflected the reliance on prescription tranquilizers that many housewives used to cope with the stress and anxiety of daily life. These pills, often dispensed with a doctor's approval, were a quiet acknowledgement of the immense demands placed on women. While not every household relied on them, their prevalence highlighted the invisible pressures and the lengths to which women went to maintain composure. The image of a housewife quietly managing her household, aided by small medical interventions, became emblematic of the era, a society that expected perfection without openly acknowledging the toll it exacted. It is important to understand that these pressures were not universal. Experiences varied widely depending on factors like family dynamics, socio-economic status, and personal temperament. But the cultural narrative of the time emphasized the perfection of the suburban home and the housewife as its vigilant guardian. This narrative shaped not just daily routines but identity itself. Many women internalized these expectations, measuring their worth against an often unattainable ideal, creating a cycle of stress, self-criticism, and resilience. Despite these challenges, many housewives demonstrated remarkable ingenuity, resourcefulness, and perseverance. They navigated complex schedules, mediated family dynamics, mastered cooking and cleaning techniques, and found creative ways to make the best use of their time and resources. Their daily labor, often overlooked in historical accounts, was a sophisticated orchestration of multitasking, problem-solving, and emotional intelligence. While the societal pressures were heavy, these women also found moments of agency, pride, and even humor in the midst of their routines. The legacy of suburban pressure in the 1960s serves as a lens through which we can understand broader social expectations for women during this period. It highlights how cultural ideals, domestic perfection, aesthetic presentation, and emotional composure were enforced not only through media and social norms but also through subtle mechanisms of support and control, including technology, social rituals, and pharmaceuticals. The story of the housewife becomes, therefore, a story of negotiation, a constant balancing act between external expectations, personal desire, and practical necessity. In reflecting on this era, it is striking to consider how much of what was considered modern convenience came with strings attached. The very innovations meant to simplify life, appliances, beauty products, and household management tools, often amplified the pressure to perform, both materially and socially. And yet, through it all, housewives found ways to endure, adapt, and sometimes even thrive, creating a blueprint for resilience under social and domestic expectations. By understanding the weight of suburban pressure in the 1960s, we gain insight not just into history, but into the evolving roles and expectations of women. The lessons of this era about societal pressure, resilience, and the hidden labor of domestic life resonate even today. They remind us that behind every polished kitchen, neatly made bed, and perfectly set table was a woman navigating an intricate web of expectations, often with courage, ingenuity, and quiet determination. So, as we step back from the pastel kitchens, gleaming appliances, and manicured lawns, we see a world that was not just about domestic perfection, but about human endurance. The housewives of the 1960s were expected to embody grace under pressure, to maintain order in chaos, and to keep a smile on their faces no matter what the day demanded. Their story is a testament to resilience in the face of relentless expectation, a reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic settings, the human spirit is tested, and triumph is measured not just by perfection, but by survival, adaptation, and quiet persistence. During the 1960s, the structure of suburban life reinforced a system where many women were financially dependent on their husbands. The cultural narrative of the era emphasized the husband as the primary breadwinner, the provider, and the figure responsible for financial stability, while the wife's role was defined largely within the domestic sphere. For many women, this arrangement meant that their economic security was tied almost entirely to the choices and circumstances of their spouses. A single job loss, illness, or unexpected expense could destabilize a household, creating stress that was often invisible to outsiders. Education for women was frequently limited to preparing them for marriage and domestic life, rather than for professional careers. College degrees were often pursued with the unspoken assumption that women would eventually leave the workforce, if they entered it at all. Those who did work outside the home were often confined to roles considered socially acceptable, such as teaching, nursing, or secretarial work positions that offered low pay and little room for advancement. Career ambitions were subtly discouraged, and many women internalized the idea that personal fulfillment could be achieved solely through homemaking and family management. This financial dependence created a complex psychological dynamic. On one hand, it reinforced the social expectation that women should be dedicated entirely to the household, investing their energy into domestic perfection rather than seeking personal income or professional recognition. On the other hand, it placed women in a vulnerable position, with little autonomy in decision-making or bargaining power within their families. Money, in this context, was not just a practical tool, it became a symbol of independence, agency, and, for many, a source of anxiety when withheld or controlled. Housewives often learned to manage limited household budgets with incredible resourcefulness. From meal planning and grocery shopping to clothing and childcare, they developed skills in efficiency and thrift that were rarely recognized outside the home. Coupons, sales, and hand-me-downs were not merely practical choices, they became necessary strategies for keeping the household running smoothly under tight financial constraints. Yet despite their ingenuity, the lack of financial independence meant that women had little control over larger decisions affecting their lives, such as moving to a different city, pursuing further education, or investing in personal ventures. The social environment reinforced these constraints. Advertisements, television programs, and magazines often depicted women as fulfilled, happy, and selfless when their lives revolved around family and household duties. This cultural messaging masked the challenges of financial dependence, making it appear natural or even desirable for women to rely on their husband's income. Deviations from this ideal, women seeking employment outside the home or pursuing personal ambitions were sometimes met with disapproval, gossip, or subtle social ostracism. Even in households where husbands were supportive, the structural limitations of the era meant that women had fewer opportunities to exercise independent judgment about their futures. Career options were narrow, social mobility for women was constrained, and the expectation of domestic labor remained unwavering. As a result, women often navigated a delicate balance, maintaining the household to meet societal standards while suppressing personal ambitions, all under the weight of financial dependence. In some cases, financial dependence could be directly tied to emotional dependence. Women who lacked their own income had fewer avenues to leave unhappy or unhealthy marriages, making domestic conflict more acute and stressful. Even in otherwise stable households, the power dynamics shaped by money could create tension, anxiety, and subtle forms of control that were difficult to confront. This made the pursuit of independence, whether financial or personal, an ongoing challenge with significant social and emotional implications. Despite these limitations, many women found creative ways to assert agency within the domestic sphere. They managed household budgets with remarkable skill, negotiated family priorities, and established informal networks of support with other women in the neighborhood. Book clubs, sewing circles, and church groups offered not only social engagement but also opportunities to exchange ideas, share resources, and gain a measure of influence within their communities. While these forms of agency did not always translate into financial autonomy, they provided important strategies for navigating the restrictions of the era. The intersection of financial dependence and limited professional opportunities shaped women's identities and ambitions. For many, the value of a woman was still largely measured by her ability to maintain a household, raise children, and support her husband's career. Social recognition, respect, and self-esteem were often linked to these domestic achievements rather than personal or professional success. This reinforced a cycle in which women's contributions outside the home were undervalued, while their labor inside the home was simultaneously expected to be flawless. This environment also influenced the younger generation. Daughters observed their mothers' roles and internalized the societal script, often expecting that marriage and homemaking would define their own futures. The cultural narrative created a feedback loop. Financial dependence limited personal choice, domestic perfection became a measure of worth, and societal messaging reinforced these constraints. The result was a generation of women whose labor, skill, and intelligence were essential to daily life but largely invisible in broader economic and social systems. Understanding this context is crucial for recognizing the full complexity of women's experiences during the 1960s. It was not merely a matter of lifestyle or personal preference, it was a system structured to prioritize male financial authority and female domestic labor, with all the social, psychological, and emotional implications that entailed. Yet within this structure, women displayed extraordinary adaptability, resourcefulness, and resilience, finding ways to exert influence, maintain agency, and create meaningful lives despite systemic limitations. By examining the pressures of financial dependence alongside the cultural expectations of domestic perfection, we gain a deeper understanding of the challenges housewives faced. Their experiences reveal not only the societal constraints of the era but also the quiet strength and ingenuity women brought to navigating those constraints, laying the foundation for broader social changes in the decades to follow. In the 1960s, many suburban housewives experienced profound social isolation, both physically and emotionally. While the image of a bustling household and a pristine lawn suggested activity and engagement, the reality for many women was a life confined largely to their homes, punctuated by brief interactions with neighbors or relatives. The domestic sphere, although filled with tasks, often left little opportunity for meaningful adult conversation or personal growth outside of family duties. The architecture and layout of post-war suburban neighborhoods reinforced this isolation. Single-family homes were designed with privacy in mind, often separated by lawns and driveways that discouraged casual contact between neighbors. Streets were quiet and community centers or social hubs were limited. For a woman whose daily life revolved around cleaning, cooking, and childcare, the home could feel both physically and emotionally insular. Even casual errands, such as grocery shopping or trips to the bank, offered only brief, transactional social interactions, rarely providing the depth of connection many adults crave. Compounding the physical isolation was the emotional isolation embedded in the cultural expectations of the time. Housewives were often told or believed that their fulfillment should come from managing the household, nurturing children, and supporting their husbands. Any feelings of frustration, boredom, or dissatisfaction were private burdens, often dismissed as personal failings rather than reflections of systemic constraints. There was a pervasive cultural message that women should silently endure the monotony of domestic life with grace and patience, which discouraged open discussion of their struggles. Social circles, when they existed, were often superficial or highly structured. Women might attend church functions, book clubs, or neighborhood bridge games, but these gatherings frequently reinforced societal norms rather than providing authentic spaces for self-expression or support. Conversations often revolved around domestic matters, children's behavior, or neighborhood gossip, rather than personal ambitions or challenges. While these networks could offer camaraderie, they rarely allowed women to explore their identities beyond the roles assigned by society. For women with limited family nearby or whose spouses worked long hours, the sense of isolation could be particularly acute. The repetitive nature of domestic chores, laundry, cooking, cleaning, offered few opportunities for intellectual stimulation or personal growth. Days blended into weeks with little variation, creating a cycle that could feel monotonous and draining. This isolation was not merely a physical state but an emotional one, fostering feelings of invisibility and undervaluation. Many women found themselves struggling with internalized doubt, questioning their own worth because the broader society gave little recognition to their labor and contributions. Isolation also affected mental health. Long hours spent alone, coupled with societal pressure to appear content, created fertile ground for anxiety and depression. Emotional support was often scarce. Discussing feelings of loneliness or dissatisfaction could be perceived as complaining, weakness, or failure. Even when support networks existed, women sometimes hesitated to share their struggles for fear of judgment or social repercussions. This dynamic reinforced a cycle in which women internalized their challenges and learned to cope in silence. Interestingly, some women found creative ways to mitigate the effects of social confinement. Radio, television, and literature provided windows to the world beyond the home, offering both entertainment and glimpses of alternative lifestyles or possibilities. Recipes, homemaking guides, and serialized novels gave structure to daily routines while subtly expanding intellectual horizons. Women also developed informal networks of mutual assistance, sharing childcare, recipes, and advice, creating a sense of community even within a constrained social landscape. Nevertheless, the broader impact of isolation was significant. Social confinement limited exposure to diverse ideas, reduced opportunities for career development or civic engagement, and reinforced the notion that women's roles were confined to the domestic sphere. It also contributed to the emotional toll of household labor, as women bore the full weight of responsibilities without adequate social recognition or support. Even small victories, managing a complex meal, coordinating a family event, or keeping a spotless home, often went unnoticed, leaving women to measure success primarily by their ability to meet internalized expectations. In some cases, isolation could also affect relationships within the household. Women who felt disconnected from the wider world sometimes experienced tension with their spouses or children, as the pressures and monotony of daily life left little space for personal expression or relaxation. Emotional labor, mediating conflicts, maintaining morale, and nurturing family bonds added another layer of invisible work, compounding the effects of social confinement. Despite these challenges, many women demonstrated remarkable resilience. They found ways to carve out private moments for reflection, creativity, or personal development. Hobbies such as gardening, sewing, writing letters, or crafting offered both a creative outlet and a temporary escape from domestic monotony. Some women took classes, attended lectures, or joined volunteer organizations to maintain a sense of purpose and connection. These efforts, though often modest, were acts of agency within a system that limited their options and dictated the contours of their daily lives. Understanding the isolation experienced by suburban housewives in the 1960s is crucial for appreciating the full scope of their daily realities. Physical separation, cultural expectations, and social confinement created a complex web of limitations, shaping not only women's day-to-day experiences but also their long-term sense of identity and agency. At the same time, the ways in which women navigated and resisted these constraints reveal an often overlooked strength, creativity, and adaptability that were essential to both family life and community cohesion. By examining the emotional and social dimensions of isolation, we can see that the challenges of suburban domestic life went far beyond household chores. They encompassed a struggle for recognition, meaningful connection, and personal fulfillment, struggles that were largely invisible but deeply felt, shaping the lives of women and leaving a legacy that would influence later generations and social movements. The 1960s suburban housewife lived in a world defined by rigid gender roles, where societal expectations were deeply ingrained and largely unquestioned. From childhood, women were conditioned to see domestic life as their ultimate purpose. Girls were taught to aspire to marriage, motherhood, and homemaking, while career ambitions outside the home were subtly discouraged or even stigmatized. The cultural narrative of the time framed the ideal woman as nurturing, patient, and self-sacrificing, qualities deemed necessary for maintaining a harmonious household and supporting her husband's ambitions. This social blueprint shaped nearly every aspect of a woman's day. A successful housewife was expected to wake early, prepare meals meticulously, maintain a spotless home, manage the children's schedules, and provide emotional support for every family member. Personal desires or ambitions were often subordinated to these duties, creating a tension between self-expression and social compliance. Women who questioned or deviated from these norms risked criticism, gossip, or being labeled selfish. This pressure was not just social. It was internalized. Many women measured their own worth by how well they adhered to these societal standards, which often led to feelings of inadequacy despite their tireless efforts. Media and advertising reinforced these expectations at every turn. Television programs, magazine articles, and advertisements celebrated the perfect housewife, smiling, efficient, and effortlessly managing her domestic empire. Shows like Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best depicted homes where the wife's primary role was to support her husband and children, rarely portraying personal ambition or intellectual pursuits. Ads promised happiness and fulfillment through consumer goods, emphasizing that a well-kept home and fashionable appearance were the keys to social approval. This constant stream of idealized imagery created a powerful standard against which real women inevitably measured themselves. Education also played a role in shaping these expectations. Girls were encouraged to pursue feminine skills such as cooking, sewing, and child-rearing, while advanced math, science, and vocational training were often directed toward boys. This educational bias reinforced the notion that intellectual pursuits were secondary to domestic proficiency. Even in college, women faced subtle barriers to professional advancement. Courses, extracurricular activities, and career counseling often steered them toward teaching, nursing, or secretarial work, fields considered extensions of nurturing and supportive roles rather than paths to leadership or innovation. The marriage contract itself reflected these societal norms. Husbands were often seen as the primary breadwinners and decision-makers, while wives were expected to manage the home and raise children. This division of labor was culturally justified and rarely questioned. Women were advised to find satisfaction in their roles, while men were encouraged to focus on work outside the home. Though this arrangement brought structure and clarity to many households, it also limited women's autonomy and created dependency that could be difficult to challenge or escape. Peer pressure and community oversight further enforced conformity. Neighbors, relatives, and social networks functioned as informal regulators of behavior. Deviating from accepted norms, whether by pursuing a career, neglecting household duties, or expressing dissatisfaction, risked social ostracism. Even minor departures from the ideal could be magnified in gossip or judgment, reinforcing the notion that a woman's behavior reflected her morality, discipline, and family honor. The pressure to conform was omnipresent, shaping both public actions and private thoughts. Despite these constraints, many women navigated these expectations with ingenuity. They developed strategies to carve out small pockets of autonomy within the household, whether through hobbies, volunteer work, or social engagement. Some found empowerment in perfecting domestic skills, turning cooking, decorating, or sewing into avenues of personal pride and creative expression. Others pushed boundaries more directly, seeking education, part-time work, or civic involvement. These efforts were not always recognized or celebrated, yet they demonstrated a quiet resistance to the strictures of gender norms. The tension between societal expectations and personal desire also had psychological implications. Women often experienced guilt when pursuing personal interests or questioned their own satisfaction within the domestic sphere. Emotional labor maintaining family harmony, mediating conflicts, and meeting unspoken standards added to the weight of daily life. Many women carried an invisible burden, striving to fulfill both prescribed duties and internal aspirations, often without acknowledgement or reward. It is essential to recognize that these expectations were not merely personal or cultural, they were structural. Institutions, media, education, and law collectively reinforced a system in which women's roles were narrowly defined. Legal constraints, such as limitations on credit, property ownership, or professional opportunities, compounded the effects of social norms. Even when women desired independence or mobility, structural barriers often limited their options. However, the seeds of change were already taking root during this period. As women gained greater access to education, became more visible in the workforce, and connected through social and activist networks, the rigidity of traditional gender roles began to be questioned. The frustrations, isolation, and constrained lives of housewives in the 1960s would later fuel movements for women's liberation, challenging both the social expectations and the structural barriers that had long confined them. Understanding the impact of gender roles and societal expectations is crucial for comprehending the lived experience of suburban housewives. It was a life shaped by clear rules, cultural scripts, and relentless pressure to conform. Yet within that framework, women displayed creativity, resilience, and subtle forms of resistance. These dynamics illuminate not only the personal struggles of individual women but also the broader cultural and historical forces that defined an era. By examining the intersection of societal norms, gender roles, and personal ambition, we gain insight into the tension between external expectation and internal fulfillment, a tension that influenced daily life, family relationships, and the broader social landscape of suburban America. The legacy of these expectations continues to resonate, offering perspective on both historical inequalities and the ongoing evolution of gender dynamics. One of the defining aspects of life for a 1960s suburban housewife was the sheer volume and variety of household labor. While the role of a homemaker was often celebrated superficially in media and culture, the reality was far more demanding. This work was relentless, repetitive, and largely invisible, what sociologists now refer to as invisible labor. Unlike paid employment, the effort and time invested in managing a home rarely translated into recognition, status, or financial compensation. Yet it formed the backbone of suburban life. sustaining families and communities in ways that were easily overlooked. Daily routines were carefully structured but exhausting. A typical day began early with preparing breakfast, dressing and feeding children, and ensuring they were ready for school. Housewives were also responsible for cleaning the home, doing laundry, ironing clothes, shopping for groceries, and planning meals that met both nutritional needs and family preferences. Each task required planning, coordination, and constant attention to detail, often repeated multiple times a day. Even minor disruptions, a child getting sick, a broken appliance, or unexpected guests could throw the schedule into chaos, demanding improvisation and emotional labor. The invisible nature of this labor added to its burden. While a working man's achievements outside the home were tangible and socially recognized, a housewife's accomplishments, laundry folded, meals prepared, rooms cleaned, were often taken for granted. Success was measured not by personal fulfillment or innovation, but by the absence of visible problems, a spotless kitchen, cooperative children, and a harmonious household. The lack of acknowledgement meant that the emotional and physical strain of the work could go unnoticed, even by those who depended on it most. Time management was critical. Housewives had to balance numerous simultaneous responsibilities, often creating detailed mental schedules to ensure nothing was neglected. Planning extended beyond a single day, encompassing grocery lists, meal planning for the week, and budgeting household finances. Many women maintained meticulous records, comparing prices, tracking coupons, and making sure every dollar stretched as far as possible. While this labor required skill, intelligence, and creativity, it was rarely seen as real work because it occurred in the domestic sphere rather than the public, professional realm. Emotional labor was equally significant. Housewives were expected to maintain a positive, cheerful demeanor, mediate family conflicts, nurture children's emotional development, and provide unwavering support to their husbands. Balancing moods, temperaments, and social expectations often meant suppressing personal frustration or fatigue. The mental load of constantly anticipating needs, remembering schedules, and managing household dynamics added a hidden layer of stress that few outsiders recognized. Technological innovations of the time like washing machines, vacuum cleaners, and electric ovens were marketed as tools to simplify life, but in practice, they often expanded the expectations placed on women. Advertisements promised that modern appliances would free housewives from drudgery. Yet many families interpreted the increased efficiency as an opportunity to maintain even higher standards. Cleanliness and perfection became benchmarks, leaving women working harder, not less. The irony was that tools designed to save time often increased labor, as the invisible expectation of doing more, better, and faster permeated daily life. Social comparison amplified these pressures. Housewives frequently gauged their performance against neighbors, friends, or media portrayals of the ideal home. Suburban communities were highly observant environments. A well-maintained lawn, tastefully decorated interior, or meticulously organized kitchen became symbols of personal competence. This culture of comparison encouraged constant striving, often pushing women to expend extra effort to match or surpass others, despite already heavy workloads. Even within the family, recognition was limited. Children often took routines for granted, seeing meals, laundry, and cleanliness as normal rather than as results of sustained labor. Husbands, socialized to value work outside the home, sometimes failed to appreciate the intensity and skill involved in domestic management. Gratitude, if expressed at all, was sporadic, leaving women to derive satisfaction primarily from internal standards or the quiet fulfillment of serving others. The physical toll of this labor was considerable. Repetitive tasks, bending, lifting, and extended periods of standing contributed to fatigue and, in some cases, chronic pain. Emotional strain, compounded by the lack of recognition and social isolation, could lead to anxiety, depression, or feelings of invisibility. Yet, despite these challenges, women persevered, motivated by love for their families, personal pride, or the societal belief that their work was essential to social stability. Strategies for coping varied. Some women formed social networks with neighbors, exchanging advice, childcare assistance, and emotional support. Others found creative outlets within domestic labor itself, transforming chores into opportunities for self-expression through cooking, decorating, or sewing. Some maintained diaries or journals, documenting daily life as a private record of achievement. Even these small acts of acknowledgement helped mitigate the invisibility of their work and provided a sense of agency within constrained circumstances. Economic dependence added another layer of complexity. Many housewives lacked independent income or control over financial resources, which made leaving an unsatisfying marriage or negotiating household responsibilities difficult. Economic vulnerability reinforced the invisibility of labor. While the home depended on their work for stability and comfort, the legal and financial structures often failed to value it. Ultimately, household labor in the 1960s was more than a series of chores. It was a multifaceted, skilled, and emotionally demanding form of work that maintained the fabric of suburban life. It required planning, coordination, physical endurance, emotional resilience, and creative problem-solving. Understanding this invisible labor provides insight into both the challenges women faced and the resilience they displayed, highlighting a form of work that was essential, yet systematically undervalued. By examining these dynamics, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity of domestic life and the dedication required to sustain it. The experience of housewives managing invisible work also helps contextualize broader societal patterns of gender inequality, showing how deeply cultural norms, expectations, and labor divisions were intertwined with daily life. In the 1960s suburban household, childcare was a central, all-encompassing aspect of a housewife's responsibilities. Raising children was not just about feeding and clothing them. It involved constant supervision, emotional guidance, and shaping their intellectual and social development. The role demanded both time and ingenuity, as housewives had to balance nurturing care with discipline, moral instruction, and educational support, all while managing the broader demands of household labor. Mornings often began with the orchestrated chaos of preparing children for school. Breakfasts had to be nutritious yet quick, clothing laid out, and backpacks packed with all necessary books and supplies. For younger children, assistance with dressing, washing, and even toileting could consume significant portions of the morning. Housewives had to ensure that each child arrived at school on time, often navigating transportation logistics such as walking, driving, or coordinating with carpool schedules. Once children were at school, the work shifted to planning for their ongoing care, education, and enrichment. Housewives often reviewed school assignments, monitored progress, and offered tutoring or guidance when needed. The expectation was not simply to facilitate learning but to actively foster intellectual growth, instill discipline, and cultivate curiosity. For some, this included organizing home-based lessons, reading aloud, or engaging children in educational activities that went beyond what schools provided. The educational responsibilities extended to social development. Housewives had to teach manners, etiquette, and interpersonal skills, preparing children to navigate both family dynamics and broader social environments. This work was subtle and ongoing, encompassing guidance on sharing, conflict resolution, empathy, and resilience. A significant portion of this labor was invisible, yet it profoundly shaped the children's character, behavior, and social competence. Emotional support was another critical dimension. Housewives served as the primary confidants for children, responding to fears, anxieties, and emotional challenges. They provided reassurance after a bad day at school, mediated sibling disputes, and offered encouragement in moments of frustration or failure. Emotional labor was constant. Housewives were expected to maintain patience, composure, and optimism even when exhausted or overwhelmed. Extracurricular activities added further demands. Music lessons, sports, and club participation required careful scheduling, transportation, and financial management. Housewives often coordinated these activities while ensuring children had the necessary equipment, uniforms, or practice time. They were also responsible for fostering discipline and commitment, encouraging children to balance schoolwork, hobbies, and play. These responsibilities required not only time but also strategic planning, flexibility, and resourcefulness. Health and nutrition were closely intertwined with childcare. Housewives monitored children's diets, arranged doctor visits, and administered medication when necessary. They tracked growth, development milestones, and any health concerns, making adjustments to routines or diets as needed. The goal was not only to maintain physical well-being but to establish habits that would promote lifelong health and resilience. Housewives also played a key role in shaping children's moral and civic values. Reading stories, discussing societal norms, and guiding behavior at home and in the community were part of the broader educational mission. Mothers often served as the primary bridge between cultural expectations and the child's personal understanding, shaping attitudes toward responsibility, fairness, and community participation. Despite the magnitude of these responsibilities, recognition was limited. Society largely assumed that child rearing was a natural and expected duty of women, rather than a skill-intensive, laborious process requiring patience, insight, and planning. Yet, the impact of their work was profound. Every lesson taught, every conflict mediated, and every bedtime story read contributed to shaping children into capable, confident, and socially aware individuals. Balancing childcare with household management required constant multitasking. Housewives often combined meal preparation with helping with homework or monitored playtime while doing laundry. This juggling of responsibilities demanded organization, adaptability, and the ability to anticipate multiple needs simultaneously. Even brief interruptions, a sick child, a sudden school assignment, or a household emergency could require rapid adjustments, testing both patience and problem-solving abilities. Social networks were also vital in supporting childcare. Housewives frequently coordinated with neighbors, friends, and family to share babysitting duties, advice, and resources. These informal support systems helped alleviate the pressures of childcare, provided social stimulation for children, and reinforced a sense of community. Ultimately, childcare and educational responsibilities were foundational to suburban life. They required a blend of emotional intelligence, practical skill, and foresight, all performed largely without recognition or compensation. By managing these duties, housewives ensured that children not only thrived in the present but were prepared to navigate future academic, social, and personal challenges. Their work in this sphere demonstrated a combination of resilience, creativity, and dedication, highlighting how essential their role was to the stability and success of families and communities alike. In addition to managing the home and raising children, suburban housewives of the 1960s were deeply influenced by the social and community expectations that shaped their daily lives. These expectations were not merely suggestions, they were unwritten rules that guided behavior, appearance, and interactions, often creating pressure to conform to a highly visible standard of respectability and competence. One major arena where community expectations manifested was in neighborhood social life. Suburban communities were often close-knit, with households visible to neighbors, friends, and local organizations. Housewives were expected to maintain well-kept lawns, tidy gardens, and pristine homes, not only for personal satisfaction but as a reflection of family pride and social standing. The appearance of the home became a social signal. A clean, orderly household implied diligence, good morals, and responsible parenting, while neglect could invite judgment or gossip. Social gatherings and neighborhood events were another critical component. Block parties, church socials, school events, and PTA meetings offered housewives opportunities to showcase hospitality, organization, and social skill. Hosting guests involved elaborate planning, from preparing meals and arranging seating to ensuring the home presented an appealing and welcoming environment. Participation in these activities also meant performing etiquette with poise, displaying friendliness, tact, and charm while subtly navigating competitive comparisons among peers. Fashion and personal appearance were equally significant. Housewives were expected to dress neatly and stylishly, reflecting both social awareness and personal discipline. Daily routines included hairstyling, makeup, and clothing coordination, even when staying primarily at home. These practices were part of a larger social narrative. By maintaining a polished exterior, housewives demonstrated their capacity for self-care, household management, and respect for communal norms. Community expectations extended into volunteer work and civic engagement. Women were often involved in school committees, charity drives, and local organizations, contributing labor and leadership while maintaining the image of a committed, socially responsible citizen. Balancing these obligations with household duties required careful planning and prioritization, as the demands of volunteering could conflict with personal or family needs. Yet participation was often seen as essential for social validation and maintaining influence within the community. Peer pressure and comparison were constant undercurrents. Housewives measured themselves against neighbors, friends, and social standards promoted by magazines and media. The ideal suburban mother was not only competent but cheerful, patient, and graceful under pressure. Falling short of these expectations could lead to subtle social criticism, reinforcing the importance of maintaining appearances even when personal circumstances were challenging. These community pressures were not merely superficial, they shaped daily routines, personal choices, and family dynamics. The constant negotiation between private needs and public perception required skill, emotional resilience, and adaptability. Housewives had to manage not only the tangible tasks of their homes but also the intangible work of social performance, presenting an image of success and stability to the world outside. Even simple activities like grocery shopping or walking children to school carried social weight. A well-dressed mother walking polite children signaled order and propriety. A distracted or frazzled appearance could invite judgment. Thus, housewives were constantly aware of both their own behavior and how it might be interpreted, effectively living under a continuous, low-level form of scrutiny. Community and social expectations also reinforced gender roles, cementing the idea that women's primary responsibility was the domestic sphere. While men were measured by career success and income, women were judged by household management, parenting, and social grace. This dual standard created pressure to excel in multiple, often invisible areas of life, balancing the tangible work of domestic labor with the performative demands of social life. Despite these pressures, many housewives navigated expectations with creativity and strategic engagement. Social interactions could become opportunities to form alliances, exchange advice, and gain support. Women developed networks that offered both practical assistance such as childcare swaps, and recipe sharing and emotional reinforcement, creating communities within the larger community that helped them meet the demands placed upon them. Ultimately, the weight of community and social expectations profoundly shaped the suburban housewife's experience. Her daily life was not only defined by household duties but also by the constant negotiation of social standards, the careful presentation of self and family, and the ongoing performance of competence, grace, and morality. Through these efforts, she maintained not only her own reputation but also the perceived stability and respectability of her entire household, reinforcing the interconnectedness of private labor and public perception in mid-century suburban life. One of the defining aspects of suburban housewife life in the mid-20th century was the introduction and increasing availability of technological innovations and household tools. These devices promised to simplify domestic labor, free up time, and elevate the standards of home management, but they also brought new expectations and pressures, subtly reshaping the role of women in the household. The kitchen, in particular, became a hub of innovation. The widespread adoption of electric ovens, refrigerators, and mixers transformed the preparation and storage of food. Housewives could now cook meals more efficiently, store perishable items longer, and experiment with recipes that previously required far more time and labor. The microwave oven, which became increasingly popular in the late 1960s and 1970s, introduced an entirely new way of thinking about meal preparation, emphasizing speed and convenience. These tools were marketed not only as practical devices but also as symbols of modern living, connecting domestic efficiency to social status and technological sophistication. Laundry was another area, revolutionized by technology. Washing machines with automatic cycles, electric irons, and dryers replaced the back-breaking work of hand washing, wringing, and line drying. These machines allowed housewives to maintain larger wardrobes and linens, keeping up with the social expectation of a perfectly maintained household. Yet, even as labor was eased, the technology increased the visibility of domestic standards. Clothes and fabrics were expected to be spotless, wrinkle-free, and neatly pressed, reinforcing the pressure to achieve a polished presentation. Vacuum cleaners, floor polishers, and other cleaning appliances similarly transformed household maintenance. Homes could be kept cleaner with less physical strain, but the devices also facilitated higher expectations. A home that did not sparkle, even with advanced tools at hand, could be interpreted as negligence. Highlighting the paradoxical nature of technological convenience, it simplified work while simultaneously raising standards for performance. Communication and information technology also played a role in shaping housewife life. Telephones became common household fixtures, allowing women to coordinate social events, manage family logistics, and maintain community connections. Magazines, catalogs, and later television programs provided a constant stream of information about new products, fashion, recipes, and home decorating ideas. This exposure to trends reinforced ideals of domestic perfection, encouraging housewives to continuously adapt, upgrade, and innovate within their homes. Some technological tools were also tied to leisure and self-improvement. Sewing machines, electric mixers for baking, and even early home entertainment devices allowed women to engage in hobbies, create personal projects, or provide creative touches for the family. These activities often doubled as opportunities to demonstrate skill, resourcefulness, and dedication, qualities highly valued in the suburban social framework. It is important to recognize that while technology eased certain physical burdens, it also created new forms of mental labor. Managing schedules, maintaining appliances, staying updated on products, and ensuring that each device functioned correctly added layers of responsibility. The promise of time-saving devices sometimes clashed with the reality of higher expectations, subtly reinforcing the continuous, often invisible labor of housewives. Marketing campaigns of the era also played a crucial role. Advertisements framed technological adoption as a measure of competence, modernity, and moral responsibility. A housewife who used the latest gadgets was not only efficient but also caring, progressive, and attentive to her family's well-being. Conversely, failure to adopt new devices could be interpreted as laziness or incompetence, highlighting how consumer technology intertwined with social judgment. Despite these pressures, many housewives leveraged technology strategically. They experimented with appliances to improve cooking, streamline cleaning, and explore creative projects. In doing so, they demonstrated adaptability, innovation, and resourcefulness, redefining domestic labor as both a practical and skillful domain. The presence of technology enabled a subtle shift. While housewives continued to shoulder significant responsibilities, they also gained tools that allowed for more control over their time, space, and creativity. In sum, technological innovations transformed suburban life by reshaping daily routines, raising standards for household management, and blending convenience with expectation. They became an integral part of the housewife's identity, influencing not only how labor was performed but also how competence, modernity, and social status were expressed. The mid-century suburban home, brimming with new appliances and tools, reflected both progress and pressure, offering glimpses of liberation while maintaining the weight of responsibility inherent in domestic life. In addition to cooking, cleaning, and childcare, housewives in the mid-20th century were often the primary managers of the household budget. While men frequently controlled income from external employment, the day-to-day handling of money, bill payments, grocery shopping, and financial planning typically fell to women. This responsibility required meticulous organization, strategic thinking, and an ability to make every dollar stretch, a skill set that was both practical and, in many ways, underappreciated outside the home. Grocery shopping was a central aspect of budget management. Housewives would navigate weekly advertisements, coupon deals, and bulk purchase strategies to maximize value while meeting the nutritional needs of the family. Meal planning was often dictated not only by time and family preference but also by cost constraints. The ability to transform modest ingredients into filling, balanced meals was a point of pride and a demonstration of skill. Homemakers developed innovative strategies, from preserving seasonal produce to repurposing leftovers, showcasing resourcefulness that went far beyond mere cooking. Tracking household expenses also extended to utilities, clothing, school supplies, and healthcare. Housewives maintained careful accounts, often using handwritten ledgers to monitor spending. This careful tracking was crucial, as families were frequently expected to live within strict financial limits while maintaining the appearance of comfort and stability. The balancing act between thrift and societal expectation was delicate. Extravagance was frowned upon, yet a home perceived as shabby could invite judgment from neighbors or relatives. The rise of consumer culture in the 1950s and 1960s added new layers to financial management. Housewives were constantly exposed to advertisements promoting the latest household gadgets, fashion, and conveniences. Deciding what to purchase became both a practical and social consideration. Spending choices were intertwined with perceptions of modernity, efficiency, and care for the family. Choosing wisely required both financial acumen and social awareness, further emphasizing the housewife's role as an economic manager. Beyond day-to-day purchases, housewives also navigated savings and investments. Some women contributed to family savings accounts, oversaw insurance policies, and planned for large expenditures such as home repairs, vacations, or major appliances. This often required negotiation with spouses or family members, careful forecasting, and an understanding of long-term financial goals. These skills, though rarely formally acknowledged, were essential for the stability and prosperity of the household. Interestingly, the role of financial manager gave housewives a measure of authority and influence within the family. Though societal narratives often framed women as secondary earners, their control over household finances meant they had significant power over how resources were allocated and priorities were set. This position allowed them to shape family decisions, from dietary choices to educational investments and leisure activities. Yet, managing finances also carried stress. Limited resources, unexpected expenses, and the pressure to maintain appearances meant that housewives had to constantly plan, adjust, and problem-solve. Financial management was rarely a simple or purely administrative task. It was a complex, ongoing negotiation between necessity, desire, and social expectation. In many ways, the housewife's mastery of household budgets reflects a blend of creativity, pragmatism, and strategic thinking. Her ability to optimize resources, anticipate needs, and maintain stability amidst uncertainty exemplifies the often invisible labor that sustained not only the household but the broader social fabric of mid-century suburban life. While housewives were primarily defined by their roles within the home, many actively sought opportunities for personal growth, education, and skill development. Far from being passive or stagnant, these women often pursued knowledge and hobbies that enriched their lives and, indirectly, their families' lives as well. Adult education classes, community workshops, and self-directed learning were common avenues through which housewives expanded their skills and horizons. One prominent area of focus was continuing education. Some women attended local colleges or vocational schools to acquire skills that could support part-time work or volunteer opportunities. Courses in typing, bookkeeping, and shorthand were particularly popular, equipping women with practical skills that could translate into financial independence or a flexible return to the workforce. Language classes, literature studies, and even early computing courses allowed women to explore intellectual interests while staying connected to the broader social world. Beyond formal education, housewives often cultivated hobbies and crafts that required creativity, patience, and technical ability. Sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery were not merely pastimes. They were avenues for producing useful, high-quality household items and clothing while expressing artistic sensibility. Gardening offered both aesthetic satisfaction and practical benefits, providing fresh produce and flowers for the home. Even cooking was sometimes treated as an experimental art, with housewives testing new recipes and techniques to improve meals and explore global flavors. Community involvement also played a significant role in self-improvement. Women participated in local clubs, religious groups, and volunteer organizations, often taking leadership positions. These activities helped develop organizational, public speaking, and management skills, all of which could enhance confidence and social influence. Many housewives became adept networkers, exchanging knowledge, advice, and support with other women in their communities. This not only fostered personal growth but also reinforced the collective social fabric of neighborhoods and towns. Reading and intellectual engagement were key components of personal development. Housewives frequently read newspapers, magazines, novels, and instructional books, staying informed about current events, cultural trends, and domestic innovations. This practice allowed them to contribute meaningfully to conversations with friends, family, and their communities, breaking the stereotype of the isolated or uneducated homemaker. For some, book clubs and discussion groups provided a structured forum for exchanging ideas, critiquing literature, and debating social issues, creating spaces for mental stimulation and reflection. Self-improvement extended beyond the purely intellectual. Physical fitness and health consciousness began to gain importance, with women participating in local exercise classes, walking clubs, and home fitness routines. Maintaining personal health was seen not only as a way to enhance quality of life but also as a means to fulfill family responsibilities more effectively. Emotional well-being, too, became a concern, with many women seeking social support, advice, and spiritual guidance to manage the stresses of household life. In pursuing education, hobbies, and self-improvement, housewives subtly challenged societal expectations. They demonstrated that being a homemaker did not equate to intellectual or creative stagnation. On the contrary, their commitment to personal growth often enhanced their capacity to contribute meaningfully to their families and communities. By nurturing curiosity, discipline, and skill, these women embodied a quiet yet powerful form of empowerment, showing that the domestic sphere could be a site of learning, creativity, and personal fulfillment. Ultimately, this dimension of housewifery underscores the multidimensionality of women's lives. The pursuit of knowledge, artistry, and personal growth, intertwined with domestic duties, reveals a complex balance of responsibility and ambition, routine and exploration, practicality and passion. These efforts shaped the cultural, intellectual, and social contours of mid-century domestic life, leaving an enduring legacy of resilience, skill, and ingenuity. Beyond their immediate families, housewives played a crucial role in shaping social networks and community structures. Their daily routines, though centered on the home, often involved constant interaction with neighbors, friends, and extended family members. These interactions were far more than casual exchanges. They formed the backbone of local social cohesion, creating networks of mutual support, information sharing, and collective problem solving. Neighborhood connections were particularly significant. Housewives frequently organized and participated in block parties, communal meals, and informal gatherings. These events were not only recreational but also practical, allowing women to exchange advice on child rearing, cooking, household management, and even employment opportunities. A visit to a neighbor's home could quickly turn into a collaborative session on sewing, preserving food, or budgeting, blending social interaction with knowledge sharing. Community groups and organizations also benefited from housewives' involvement. Religious institutions, charitable associations, and local clubs often relied heavily on women's volunteer labor and organizational skills. Fundraising events, holiday drives, and social programs were frequently planned and executed by housewives, demonstrating their ability to mobilize resources and people effectively. Through these efforts, they influenced community development, education, and social welfare initiatives, leaving a tangible mark on the quality of life within their towns and neighborhoods. Additionally, housewives often created networks of support that functioned as informal safety nets. Sharing childcare responsibilities, lending household items, or offering guidance during family crises fostered trust and reciprocity among women. These relationships could extend across generations, connecting younger mothers with more experienced ones, ensuring the transfer of practical knowledge, moral guidance, and emotional support. In this sense, housewives acted as community anchors, ensuring continuity and stability amid social and economic changes. Communication and information exchange were another key aspect of these networks. Housewives stayed informed about local events, public health initiatives, and community concerns, often serving as conduits of information for their families and neighbors. This role elevated them from the private sphere into a subtle yet influential position within public life. By attending meetings, volunteering, and maintaining active social circles, they bridged the gap between household routines and broader civic engagement. Importantly, these social networks were not merely utilitarian, they also provided emotional and psychological benefits. Friendships, shared experiences, and collaborative projects offered companionship and validation, countering the isolation that could accompany domestic life. Through these connections, women found opportunities for laughter, creativity, and personal expression, reinforcing the idea that domestic roles could coexist with vibrant social lives. In summary, the social networking and community engagement of housewives extended far beyond neighborhood gossip or casual visits. Their contributions were instrumental in fostering interconnected, resilient communities where knowledge, resources, and support flowed freely. By organizing events, volunteering, and maintaining personal networks, housewives exercised influence that rippled through social, cultural, and civic spheres, highlighting the power of domestic labor as a force for collective benefit. The labor and ingenuity of housewives left an enduring legacy that went far beyond the immediate needs of their households. While much of their work was invisible, repetitive, and often taken for granted, it carried profound implications for cultural continuity, societal values, and the skills passed down to future generations. Housewives were, in essence, the custodians of tradition, knowledge, and community memory. One of the most visible aspects of this legacy was the transmission of cultural practices. From culinary skills to holiday rituals, from sewing techniques to household management strategies, housewives ensured that the practices, tastes, and techniques of one generation were passed seamlessly to the next. Recipes that had been developed under conditions of scarcity during the Great Depression, for example, were adapted, preserved, and shared, ensuring not only sustenance but also the continuity of regional and familial identities. Similarly, lessons in thrift, organization, and problem-solving were taught not through textbooks, but through daily example and hands-on instruction, embedding practical wisdom into the fabric of family life. Beyond tangible skills, housewives transmitted social values and behavioral norms. Through everyday interactions, they modeled patience, cooperation, resilience, and ethical conduct. Children observed their mothers navigating complex challenges, balancing multiple responsibilities, and making decisions that affected the well-being of the family. These lessons shaped character, work ethic, and social awareness, influencing the choices and attitudes of successive generations. In this sense, housewives were powerful educators, not in formal classrooms, but within the living, breathing laboratories of home and community. Housewives also contributed to the preservation of community memory. By maintaining family records, documenting events, participating in local organizations, and engaging in social rituals, they created an informal archive of communal life. These records and memories became essential reference points for understanding societal changes, local history, and collective identity. In many ways, the home became a microcosm of society, with the housewife serving as the archivist and cultural mediator. The cumulative impact of these efforts extended into broader social, economic, and cultural realms. By nurturing self-sufficient, resilient families, housewives indirectly contributed to societal stability. Communities built on strong family units, supportive networks, and shared cultural practices were better equipped to withstand economic shocks, social upheavals, and environmental challenges. The quiet, often overlooked labor of women in the domestic sphere thus had ripple effects far beyond the household walls, influencing the trajectory of entire communities. Finally, the legacy of housewives is also reflected in contemporary understandings of labor, gender roles, and value. While historical narratives often sidelined domestic labor as secondary to paid employment, modern perspectives increasingly recognize its complexity, significance, and impact. The skills, strategies, and resilience cultivated by housewives continue to inform contemporary discussions on gender equity, labor recognition, and social policy. By acknowledging the depth and breadth of their contributions, society gains a more complete understanding of history and the foundations upon which present and future generations build. In essence, the work of housewives during challenging historical periods was far more than day-to-day survival. It was an ongoing act of cultural preservation, social engineering, and intergenerational education. Their influence shaped not only individual households but entire communities, leaving a legacy that endures in family traditions, communal cohesion, and the unacknowledged yet foundational labor that underpins society. As we reflect on the lives of housewives during some of the most challenging periods in history, it becomes clear that their contributions were far more than domestic chores. From managing scarce resources and innovating in the kitchen, to caring for children, preserving culture, building community networks, and passing down invaluable skills and values, these women were the quiet architects of resilience and survival. Each act of labor, no matter how small it seemed at the time, created ripples that strengthened families, communities, and society as a whole. Their ingenuity, perseverance, and dedication not only shaped the past but continue to influence the present, reminding us of the power and significance of everyday work and human creativity. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history and for taking the time to appreciate the remarkable lives of these unsung heroes. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the stories that shape our world.